What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and today we'll be finishing up our first round of Rogue Guides for the launch of Shadowlands with the sneakiest, most shadowiest spec of the three, Subtlety. This video will cover things like new abilities that we'll learn as we level from 50 to 60, talent choices for both leveling and endgame content, stat priorities, conduits, covenant choices, and legendaries. So let's see what Subtlety has waiting for us in Shadowlands. A quick little disclaimer for those of you watching. As most of you probably know, I focus on PvE topics when it comes to information on the channel, so this guide is going to target things like dungeons and raids exclusively. It's also still very subject to change, as we've seen Covenant and Soulbind changes very frequently in the past couple weeks when this guide came out, so take this information with a grain of salt and be mindful of simming changes you choose to make on your character, regardless of the situation. As I mentioned in the intro, I'll be covering all of the new abilities that we'll be earning as we level from 50 to 60, as well as talent recommendations for leveling and endgame content. I'll also go over our current stat priority and recommended conduits, covenants, and legendaries. We'll start with the new abilities and ranks of abilities we'll earn while leveling up to 60. We'll see our brand new AoE finisher, Black Powder, at level 52. This will give us a spammable AoE combo point spender to use, but it won't be super potent until we get a couple later ranks for other abilities, which I'll explain shortly. This move costs 35 energy and has an 8 target hit cap. At level 54, we'll get Numbing Poison. This is a new non-lethal poison that reduces the attack speed and cast speed of our targets hit by it by 15%. This is a pretty strong non-lethal poison, but it also has an interaction with our Shiv ability. If you shiv a target when this is your active non-lethal poison, you'll remove an Enrage effect from that target. For Subtlety, this is a fantastic addition to our already very impressive utility toolkit in dungeons, but probably won't see something that sees much impact in raid encounters. At level 56, we'll earn Shuriken Storm rank 2. This will cause any critical hits from Shuriken Storm to also apply the Find Weakness debuff, which can be used in conjunction with Symbols of Death to put out a guaranteed flurry of critically hitting shurikens to get a lot of Find Weaknesses out all at once. At level 58, we'll earn rank 2 of Black Powder. This will tie in very nicely with Shuriken Storm rank 2, as this new bonus makes Black Powder deal 50% additional damage as shadow damage to all targets that are hit with it while Find Weakness is active on them. While leveling to 60, you might want to consider running some different talents than you normally might consider. These are of course entirely up to you, but I find these talent options to be exceptionally useful. For the level 15 row, the newly reintroduced and redesigned Premeditation is easily the best choice. Not only does it put out free Slice and Dices if you use Shadow Strike from Stealth or your first Shadow Strike from Shadow Dance, but it also gives you extra combo points if you have Slice and Dice already active when you do it. This saves you a lot of GCDs, time, and energy from refreshing it between every enemy you fight in the open world. For level 25, there are two choices that are pretty viable in my opinion. Subterfuge allows you to spam a couple extra Shadow Strikes since you can use stealth-based moves for 3 seconds after breaking stealth, as well as increasing your Shadow Dance duration by a whopping 1 second. Night Stalker, on the other hand, gives you a base movement speed increase of 20% while in stealth, as well as a modest damage increase of 12% while Shadow Dance is active. Realistically, you'd be taking this more so for the movement speed bonus in leveling, which I personally think would be more beneficial than an extra Shadow Strike or 2 over the long term, especially in areas you can't mount in. For the level 30 talent row, Marked for Death is an exceptionally strong leveling talent, as it allows us to snipe low health enemies for free combo points over and over due to the reset cooldown on death function of the talent. For the level 35 row, Soothing Darkness is hands down the best leveling talent of the three. Between healing during Shadow Dance as well as just while stealthed and moving between mobs for 3% of your max health every second, you'll be able to avoid using up tons of health potions or waiting to eat and heal between damaging encounters. For level 40, none of these options are terribly impactful to your leveling process, though of the three, Prey on the Weak is the only direct DPS gain, since we can apply Find Weakness with a cheap shot and still hit the target upside the head with a couple Shadow Strikes if you choose to run Subterfuge, or you can drop an Eviscerate on them with Marked for Death immediately. If for whatever reason you need to slow a group of enemies though, you could choose Night Terrors, which might see some usage if you're trying to just rush through an area and not have to worry about fighting anything, because if they're slower than you, they'll eventually de-aggro. For level 45, Enveloping Shadows is our go-to talent, as it gives us an extra charge of Shadow Dance and gives us an increased cooldown reduction effect to our Deepening Shadows passive for every combo point we spend. This works out quite nicely with Marked for Death spam since it lets us burn through combo points, which means more Shadow Dance cooldowns to use. And for level 50, you'll want to run Secret Technique. This is mainly because Master of Shadows is relatively unnecessary while leveling due to the downtime between packs of enemies for energy regen, and Secret Technique is a pretty good burst hitting move that has cooldown reduction built into it as well. And if you choose to run War Mode, there are a number of talent choices that can prove useful for leveling as well. Dagger in the Dark is one of the only real direct damage increasing benefits in War Mode, as it applies an aura debuff to all enemies within 20 yards of you while you're in stealth. For each second you're in stealth within range of those enemies, they'll have a debuff put on them that makes your next Shadow Strike to them deal 10% more damage per stack, stacking up to 10 times. This debuff lasts for 10 seconds even after leaving stealth, just as a heads up. Cold Blood is a small DPS gain, though it is on a minute cooldown. This will make your next Cheap Shot or Shadow Strike deal up to 10% of the target's health in damage, so pretty nice for those quest mobs or elites with higher health pools. For a third option, there isn't really anything that's a true DPS gain. If you just want to have some fun, you can run the finishing move Death from Above. Or if you want to be able to drop combat more often, you could run Thief's Bargain to shave off 45 seconds from your Vanish cooldown, but this will cost you a reduction to your maximum health of 15%. For talent choices, once we're max level and getting ready for raiding and dungeons and whatnot, things will change a bit. It's always best to sim between different talent choices for each row since talents aren't always a one-size-fits-all matter, but these loadouts should be pretty accurate and put you in the right direction for the most possible damage. For a pure single target build, we'll be looking at running Weapon Master, Shadow Focus, Deeper Stratagem, Enveloping Shadows, and Master of Shadows. Yes, lots of shadows because subtlety. Weapon Master allows for extra procs of Backstab and Shadow Strike, meaning free damage and extra combo points. Shadow Focus allows us to maximize the time we're in Shadow Dance by not needing to worry quite as much about running out of energy and missing out on a GCD, which is pretty important since a large majority of our damage is when we're in Shadow Dance, so reducing the energy cost of our moves by 20% is a pretty big deal. Deeper Stratagem helps buff our finisher damage, which is something our Executioner Mastery stat helps to fuel as well, while also giving us one extra combo point that we can fill up to make sure we don't waste any since Shadow Strike always generates at least 2 combo points, potentially 4 if you get a Weapon Master proc. Enveloping Shadows is a very potent talent as we only have one charge of Shadow Dance without it, and it also improves the passive cooldown recovery we receive from our Deepening Shadows passive. And Master of Shadows also helps to ensure that we're not going to run out of energy too easily during Shadow Dance, which again is very important to our overall damage output. For cleave situations and Mythic Plus, you'll run some different talents. We'll swap out Weapon Master for Premeditation, mainly because Weapon Master only benefits our Shadow Strikes and Backstabs, which are moves we use a lot less of in Mythic Plus if we're in between AoE trash packs. It also allows us to get Slice and Dice rolling very easily without having to waste GCDs on it, which does feel pretty nice in the rotation as an added Feelycraft bonus. We'll also want to swap out Master of Shadows for Secret Technique, as this is a very potent burst hit of damage that we can line up with our other damage boosting abilities like Symbols of Death and Shadow Dance. An important thing to keep an eye on as you start gearing your character out from dungeons and raids and world quests and all that is your stat priority. Thankfully, as of now, agility is worth quite a lot more than any of your secondary stats, so item level should generally be a pretty strong indicator of an upgrade. However, when you start getting multiple of the same item level piece, or pieces that are really close in item level with different stats, you'll want to start simming your character's gear options to see what will perform best for your exact loadout. This can change from a variety of things, such as what talents you're running, what Covenant Soulbind you're using, your legendary choice, your conduit choice, and more. So that's why I strongly recommend checking for yourself with any changes you plan on making to your loadout. For a general rule of thumb though, our secondary stats for single target should be something along these lines. You'll want a focus on good balancing of versatility and crit, with haste being better than mastery if you can't find any straight crit verse gear. Again, this can change very quickly based on your legendary choice, Covenant Soulbind choice, etc. So as I mention all the time, sim yourself. For AoE, Mastery becomes quite a bit better, though you'll still want crit and versatility. Haste starts to drop off quite a bit more as it is not a strong AoE talent, so you'll want to avoid it if possible. Again, always check your own character out to see what will benefit you the most with the loadout and gear you have available to you. Up next, we'll look over Subtlety's Conduits. Conduits are very similar to the relics we had on our artifact weapons in Legion, if you remember those. These are earned from a variety of sources throughout the game, but will always have one specific source, and basically they have special bonuses on them of a variety of types that improve our abilities. There are 3 types of them: Potency, which are damage boosting ones, Finesse, which help give us bonuses to our utility, and Endurance, which usually offer defensive buffs or self-healing features. These will go into a Soulbind tree, which is another new system in Shadowlands. The simple way to think of this is like a unique talent tree with branching paths that let you choose exactly what bonuses you want and conduit slots you want to use. Every Covenant has 3 Soulbind characters, which you'll unlock as you increase your Renown. Renown is more or less Covenant reputation, to keep it simple, and you increase it a few times a week by doing 2 specific weekly quests, which involve going to the Maw to rescue souls and gathering Anima for your Covenant. Anima is a new currency for Shadowlands, and is used for Covenant-specific activities like improving your Covenant Sanctum or buying cosmetic rewards and things like that. A very important thing to know about Renown and Soulbinds, though, is that the Soulbind tree is not fully unlocked just because you earned a new Soulbind character. It is tied to the Renown progression, so it does take some time to be able to utilize the entire Soulbind tree of every Soulbind character, and due to this, some Soulbind characters might be stronger or weaker than others in early game versus late game. Just something to bear in mind. Back on the topic of conduits, though, we generally will want to take advantage of our potency conduit options, with the exception of some Soulbind traits that are pretty potent. So that is going to be the topic of this next section. I'll cover finesse and endurance ones in a future video, but that's going to be targeted at all 3 specs of rogues since they are universal options. There will be 4 subtlety-specific conduits we can earn, so I'll go over those now as well as their confirmed drop sources. That doesn't mean you can't get them from other sources, it's just that they have a specific source, and you still can earn them from like world quests and stuff like that, as I've seen that happen on the beta a couple times already. There is also a conduit specific to each Covenant for rogues to use, however that's a little bit outside of the scope of this Subtlety Rogue Guide, but I will be covering all of the Covenants for rogues in the future. Deeper Daggers drops from Echelon in Halls of Atonement. This is a dungeon in Revendreth, and this conduit causes your Eviscerate and Black Powder moves to increase your shadow damage dealt for 8 seconds. This starts at an 8% increase at rank 1, scaling up to 12.8% at rank 7. Perforated Veins comes from Mistcaller in Mists of Tirnasyth. Shadow Strike increases the damage of your next backstab, stacking up to 6 times. This starts at 18% for rank 1, scaling up to 30% per stack at rank 7. Planned Execution drops from Surgeon Stitchflesh, whom is in the Necrotic Wake dungeon located in Bastion. Whenever you trigger Symbols of Death, your crit chance will be increased for the duration of Symbols of Death. This starts at 4% at rank 1, scaling up to 6.4% at rank 7. And lastly, Stiletto Staccato comes from Kintara, the first boss in Spires of Ascension, which is located in Bastion. Your Shadow Techniques passive will now also reduce the cooldown of Shadow Blades. This starts off at 1 second per Shadow Techniques trigger at rank 1 and scales up to 1.6 seconds at rank 7. So, now that we know what all of our subtlety-specific potency conduits do, we'll go over which ones are the best options for us to try and get our hands on. Eventually, you'll probably end up with all of them, but this seems to be the order of strength for all 4 conduits in single-target situations. You'll also want to consider that there are some legendaries and covenant choices that can change the values of these slightly, so it's important to sim your character. Yes, I know I say that a lot, but seriously, it'll help you understand what works best for you in your current gearing situation. Currently, Planned Execution is looking to be our strongest conduit. This gives us a nice increase to one of our strongest stats, Critical Strike, and even better, it's during our increased damage from Symbols of Death. This should always virtually be lined up with Shadow Dance to maximize the damage boosting effects of all of this stuff. From there, the remaining 3 conduits are actually exceptionally close. Stiletto Staccato can sometimes work out to be a tiny bit better or worse depending on if it lets you squeeze an extra Shadow Blades into a fight. However, if the fight is ending too quickly or doesn't line up very well, then this does lose some effectiveness. Deeper daggers can also perform better if you choose to run the Finality legendary, which I'll talk about in this guide, and Perforated Veins is just a constant little damage boost to our backstabs. For Mythic Plus, Deeper Daggers becomes our strongest option, as it not only can buff our single target damage with the Eviscerate Shadow damage bonus, but also the AoE damage of Black Powder has a shadow damage component as well. Planned Execution is also a strong option, as the more often we can critically hit with Shuriken Storm, the more Find Weakness uptime we can keep in AoE situations. Next, we'll go over Covenant Choice. This is something you'll have to do once you reach level 60, so you can use all these Conduits and Soulbinds and all the future stuff I'll be talking about. Your 4 choices will be the Kyrian, the Night Fae, the Necrolords, and the Venthyr. You'll be helping all 4 of these covenants as you level throughout Shadowlands, so you'll grow familiar with them pretty quickly, and while leveling in their zones, you'll even get to try out their covenant signature and our class-specific ability too. I did a very thorough video on this topic pretty recently, so I'll leave a link to that on screen now, but as for this guide, I plan on just talking about the numbers and what is simming as the highest one right now. And the keyword is right now. A good thing to point out though is that in raw single target DPS, all 4 covenants are really close to each other, and they're currently within like 2 to 3%-ish difference from the best covenant down to the worst. What that means is you have a very good option and fair choice between all 4 of them, as they each have unique benefits they can bring to the table. Also, I expect there to still be some tuning in the future, as there's a couple outliers here and there. But as of this video, and it just goes to show you how regularly this stuff is still changing, the currently highest simming single target and dungeon-oriented covenant is the Night Fae. But before you commit yourself to the cause and be one with nature and whatever, I'll give you a bit of insight as to why that's the case. The Night Fae have quite a number of useful and potent damaging effects on their Soulbind trees. However, 2 of them are quite a bit more potent than any other ones. And if either of these are tuned down, then your best covenant choice will change again. For single target, the Burr's effect on Nia's Soulbind tree now affects bosses, whereas before it could not affect anything that couldn't be slowed, and bosses can't be slowed. The Burrs would slow their enemy when they hit them and deal damage over time, so if it couldn't be slowed, it didn't do any damage to them. This has been changed in a recent hotfix, meaning these Burrs are quite strong, being about 5% of overall damage. This is noticeably higher than other effects in the game, meaning it will undoubtedly be tuned down a little bit. Even if this is cut in half, literally, it will still be a strong single target option. But this just goes to show that if you're trying to hunt the min-maxing Bis Covenant, you'll probably be jumping between them quite a lot, or making multiple rogues just to squeeze that little extra bit of damage out. The same thing occurs in dungeons with the First Strike trait on Karain's Soulbind tree. This is a 25% crit chance proc for 5 seconds, and as long as you can hit the target before it hits you, you get the 25% crit. This is of course quite big in dungeons, where you can obviously get the jump on everything since they're just trash mobs and you can tag them for crit bonuses. This is, however, the last Soulbind trait on the last Soulbind of the Covenant, meaning you won't be seeing this effect for almost 3 months. While it might sound like I'm trying to discourage you from going Night Fae or anything like that, the point I'm trying to get across is that I really, truly, and strongly recommend you try all 4 of the Covenant abilities out and decide for yourself while leveling. You'll get to use all of the abilities as you level up through Shadowlands, so you'll have a much better idea of what you might be more interested in sticking with. Or again, for the truly min-maxed, you'll be hopping around a lot as tuning changes come out throughout the expansion as we unlock further levels of Renown. Or you can just pick whatever sounds cool or has like the coolest lo-fi remix or whatever that thing that just came out was, I don't know. You do you. Finally, we'll go over Legendaries. The topic of Legendaries is pretty simple, though the process of acquiring them is a bit more complex. You'll need to craft or purchase a suitable item to enchant, and then find the memory of the legendary you want to imbue into your armor. It's a kinda complex process, but not too bad. I did do a video on it a couple months back if you want more information on how exactly it all works. But I do apologize in advance since that video is a bit older than my current ones obviously, so the quality isn't quite up to the same level as my more recent things. The focus of this guide, however, will be to explain the ideal legendaries you'll want to get as well as the locations of each one. For the highest possible pure single target damage, Akari Soul Fragment is still showing to be the best option, but just barely. And I repeat, that is in literally just single target damage, so I'll also give a couple very strong alternatives that I recommend you get your hands on. This legendary's memory comes from running Torghast, Tower of the Damned. You'll need to clear Skoldus Hall on layer 3 or higher for a chance at this legendary power. This simply causes your Shadow Strikes and Cheap Shots to trigger a second Shadow Strike on your target after 2 seconds, but it'll only deal 25% of the damage of a Shadow Strike. This edges out the next legendary by just a teensy bit in single target, but it's very literally a one-trick pony, so instead I'd be more inclined to recommend the Finality legendary. However, there is a bit of a catch to this one. Finality comes from Sire Denathrius, the last boss in the Castle Nathria raid. This legendary causes your Eviscerates, Ruptures, and Black Powders to trigger a buff when you use them. This buff will then cause your next cast of that same finisher to deal 25% additional damage. There are 3 different timers you would need to track because each finisher gets its own buff timer. So let's say you use an Eviscerate and then a Black Powder, and then another Eviscerate. That second Eviscerate would have the damage boost applied to it, and your next Black Powder would still be waiting for a new damage boosted version to be used. This legendary is very versatile, and is currently considered the best overall choice for you to craft as soon as you can. The catch, of course, is you have to clear the entire first raid to get to Sire Denathrius to get this legendary power. Another strong option, and generally the best choice for Mythic Plus players and rogues who use multiple specs, is the Mark of the Master Assassin. This legendary causes you to gain 100% crit chance whenever you come out of stealth, and this crit buff lasts for 4 seconds. This comes from the Affront of Challengers dungeon boss in Theater of Pain, located in Maldraxxus. Due to the amount of times you can re-stealth between trash packs and dungeons, this is a fantastic legendary for huge burst damage, which of course Subtlety is very strong at doing. And I'll answer this now because I know someone's gonna ask otherwise. No, going into Shadow Dance does not trigger the crit buff. This legendary can skew your stat priority a little bit since you'll be going over 100% crit very often in dungeons with this, and it might affect your choice in Covenant abilities since some of them give big crit procs as well. It's a pretty mediocre option for pure single target raid usage, but for dungeons it is a fantastic option. And there you have it, folks. I hope this information proves useful to you as you level up and gear your Subtlety Rogue and explore Shadowlands. I plan on adding to this series in the future with things like rotation guides, good trinkets to look out for, and any updates that come with future patches for Shadowlands. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if so, any likes, comments, or new subscribers are all fantastic ways of showing your support for the channel. If you're new around to my little corner of the YouTube algorithm, then I'd like to welcome you to come check out the rest of the channel. I do new uploads every weekday on a variety of content, ranging from things like guides, add-on stuff, week aura stuff, tutorials, and very obviously, rogue-specific things. I'd also like to take this time to thank all of my regular viewers, commenters, subscribers, and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.